fire away whenever you give us a thumbs up. Yep. Okay, welcome everybody to Nottinghamshire City of Nottingham Fire and Rescue Authority Policy and Strategy Committee, Friday the 12th of November. Welcome to colleagues who are here joining us in the room alongside elected members as well this morning. So the first formal item on the agenda today is apologies for absence. There are none received as far as I'm aware. We're just waiting on Councillor John O'Lee, but there may well be some apologies that have been lost in transit, so we will check that out following up the meeting if Jono doesn't turn up. And we have got Councillor Tom Hollis, who's substituting today for Councillor Jason Zadrozny, so welcome, Tom, you're very welcome to the committee. Anything else on? I take it again. I mean, I don't think you need to declare an interest, but Becky, you and Sybil obviously have quite heavy involvement in the pensions board, don't you? And there's a pension report, annual report here, but I don't think there's an interest as such as it's from the board, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, no other declarations of interest. Item 3 then is the minutes, and there's a typographical error on the agenda, so it should in fact read the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of July as opposed to the 7th of July, which is actually correct on the minutes themselves, but there's just a typographical error on the agenda. So I'm going to move those minutes. Anybody want to raise any issues, either accuracy or on the actual substance of the minutes, or any questions people have got they want to raise? Morning, Toby. I'm not seeing any hands or any indications. Okay, I'm going to move those minutes as a correct record. People happy to approve them? Agreed? Yeah. Okay. Item 4 is the local firefighter pension annual report, and just before bringing in Becky, and I know Councillor Fielding, who's heavily involved in this work, may want to comment as well. I just wanted to put on record, on my behalf, on behalf of the authority, and from John the service, a huge thank you to the scheme administrators, West Yorkshire Pension Fund, and I know Becky will reflect this, and in particular just to draw attention to and thank Helen Scargill, who has been absolutely excellent and really, really supportive, particularly as we've dealt with some of the detriment court cases, which, you know, for which the narrative is well rehearsed, I think, in the conversations that we have had. But I do think it would be really nice for the authority, and perhaps this committee is the appropriate place, given we've got a report here, to write to Helen and thank her for the support that she's given us, because I think, as we all know, as county councillors as well, these issues are never easy, they're never straightforward, and having the support of somebody who's going to provide that diligence, I think, is really, really welcome. So I'd just like to suggest that we do that following the agreement of the report that we've got before us, but I'll let Becky introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report's an update from the activity from the pension board, similar to reports that you've seen in the past. I think I'm going to concentrate most on cloud, and following the case, the FBU did bring some test cases to High Court, of which 2 of these were against Notts Fire and Rescue Service. So in dealing with those, these have now been settled out of court, but in doing so, the LGA and the FBU have negotiated a memorandum of understanding and a framework agreement to try and help us deal with the immediate detriment cases. As you're aware, the legislation that's due to be brought in is not due to come into force until October 23, and we obviously have a duty to implement the to remove the age discrimination before that date. So this framework does provide us with an opportunity to treat all of those affected members in a fair way and the same way across the whole of the country. It splits members into 2 categories. Category 1 are those that have not yet retired and are coming up to retirement, and Category 2 members are those that have retired that would require a retrospective adjustment to their pensions. So if you remember back for those of you that were here, in April, the Policy and Strategy Committee did approve us to apply immediate detriment for those cases going forward. So those are those category 1 cases. So we have actually been implementing immediate detriment since that date. So this framework doesn't change any of that, and it doesn't change the way that we've been applying the immediate detriment is correct in line with the framework. So that's good to know. So in effect, we're already doing the category 1 cases, is what I'm trying to say. And then in category 2 cases are new. We're not doing those at the moment. But if we adopt the framework, then we will be able to look at those cases going forward. So the recommendation on this report is to adopt the framework. Although the legislation isn't coming into force until October 23, that does mean that there is a slight risk that if that legislation is different to the framework, we will still need to retrospectively go back and look at some of these pensions again. I think if we don't adopt it, we are running the risk of being open to further challenges in the courts. And for that reason, we're recommending that we adopt the framework agreement. We've received a grant in terms of finances. We received a grant from the government of £63,000 to try and help deal with help with some of the additional costs in applying this framework. It's my understanding that most of this will go on the costs towards West Yorkshire Pension Fund, of their costs of updating the system, the finance, the pension system, so that it can cope with the changes. Otherwise, everything's at the moment is being calculated by hand, and that's where Michael's mention of the thanks to West Yorkshire, because they're calculating every case that we send to them at the moment by hand, and then having to check it. It's a very laborious task. They are dealing with 21 other fire authorities as well, so our caseload is only a proportion of what they've got. And for that reason, I do have some concerns about the timescales that are in the framework, of our ability to meet them. I think from our end, we're able to look at the cases that we've got. We're at the moment trying to identify how many people it affects. It's not going to be a huge amount, probably 20 to 30, I would imagine, at the most. So we're in a position where we can calculate the information for those cases and supply West Yorkshire with that information. But that's just the start of the process. The most complicated part is the bit that West Yorkshire are dealing with. So for that reason, we're working very closely with them, and obviously they are doing some work to try and update the system so that they can calculate some of these through the pension system rather than have to calculate them manually. At the moment, they're managing to turn things around very quickly, so we're quite promising in that respect, and I think we're a bit ahead of the game because of the dates that our pension board and this board have fell. So I'm hoping that we can start cracking on and getting some of our cases to them in a timely manner so that they can turn them around before they get really busy with everybody else's cases. So that's it on McLeod. Has anybody got any questions on that part?
Any questions?
Is this something that affected the whole offline?
Yes. Yes.
It just highlighted something that everybody came under the same.
Yes. So we had two schemes: 1995 scheme and the 2006 pension scheme, and then in 2015 a new scheme was introduced. But they had a transition period for those that were coming up, that were closest to retirement. So those that I think it was within 10 years stayed in the old scheme, and then there was a transitionary part where those that were getting close to those 10 years moved into the new pension scheme on different dates. And because of that, that's the bit that was found to be discriminatory. So we need to remove that out of the legislation. And so what the framework or what the age discrimination case said that we needed to treat everybody similarly. So now everybody will transition into the new scheme in April 22. So, but we've already transitioned people into the new scheme in the last, since 2015, we've been transitioning people. So we need to go back and move those effectively. They get a choice whether they go back into the old scheme or they stay in the 2015 scheme, because in some cases they will be better off in the 2015 scheme. But largely, most people will be better off in their legacy scheme, the old scheme that they were in. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give people the option to move, whether to move back into the old scheme or stay in the new scheme.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Becky. Toby?
Yeah, lots of conversations about this, so I haven't really got many questions around this. I suppose the only thing I'm just interested in, again, is costs. It's a grant for 63,000 that we talked about to cover the stuff. We've got to absorb the additional costs on it. Got any idea where that is at the moment?
Internally, our costs are, we are looking at trying to draw in some additional resources in HR, because a lot of this will be picking out old records, and the other impact will be on payroll. But at the moment, we're using overtime to cover the additional costs in payroll, and we do have I do have a little bit of flexibility in there because we need people because of the resilience in the payroll, so I can absorb the majority of the costs, but we are picking up a little bit of overtime. That's probably going to cost 5-6k over the terms of doing this. But we have got another case coming on, I'll come on to that in a bit. So we are looking at appointing an additional administrator in HR to cover that. I think most for McLeod, most of our work is done. We're just working through and identifying those cases, and then we need to provide the payroll data to West Yorkshire. And so we are expecting some additional costs from West Yorkshire. Some of it are the software costs that I've discussed, and nationally that's been picked up and will be split across all services. And I think that 63,000 will all be utilised to cover that. At the moment, we did get an estimate from West Yorkshire, and they're expecting it only to increase the cost by about £2,000 to £3,000, which I think is very reasonable given the amount of work that they're doing.
That's what I wanted to hear, really. I was worried that it was.
So it's not. The other area that we have some concerns about is that we are that nationally it's not quite clear where we're going on some of the way that the tax is funded for some of these cases. So whether we pick that up from, because where the framework is requesting the fire authorities to, as you would expect in this case, to make good any payments that have been made to pension people that have retired, and if that includes, if they get an additional tax because of the way that they've been treated in the old scheme, then we pay them back that tax element, and we're trying to claim that back from the LGA as new burdens funding at the moment. But there are some issues about where we're negotiating, is what I'm trying to say. So once that becomes clear, I'll report back. But at the moment,
I mean, that was what I was just going to ask you, actually, because that doesn't sound clear.
no.
So,
yeah,
if you just nod your head, we'll leave it at that for the moment.
yeah. If I can, Chair, I think what Becky's saying there, there's an extra demand on the organisation to deal with this that has not been. I would say we've not really been able to quantify as much as we could.
Yeah.
We know it's administrative, but we know it's going to be fairly prolonged as well. So it is something we do need to keep a very close eye on.
Okay.
So obviously any increased lump sum or pension will run through the pension scheme, and so that's the national scheme. So they're not additional costs that will fall to the authority. But in the first instance, we will be paying out any tax payments, for example, or interest payments on lump sum or pensions that should have been paid, and we're now paying them late because of this process. So there will be some impact. My gut feeling is that it's not going to be a huge sum, but we're in the process of identifying what they are and calculating them, and then the LGA are working on our behalf with the government. Obviously, as things progress, we'll keep you informed.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So is this going to have a long-term effect on everything? Because there's always been pressure on the pension.
I think it's hard to quantify, but it's not going to be resolved overnight. And the point you made earlier, Roger, is there are West Yorkshire alone dealing with 21 fire services, and an unforeseen cost potentially for us in the future is if they get to a point where they're really struggling to meet the 62-day requirement in the MOU and the framework, and they have to increase their capacity in terms of staffing, what knock-on impact does that have in terms of fee for administration of the pension scheme for us as somebody who's signed up to? So I think there's all sorts of unknowns here, and I think the honest truth is that neither the LGA, the government, local fire authorities, the FBU, those who are affected, know exactly what the quantity and scale of the impact of this is going to be, because it's a bit like the conversation we were having about reconciliation of pension schemes against payroll in the County Council yesterday. 40,000 pensioners the County Council is paying, and there's a 3,000 or 4,000 difference between their reconciliation of pension records and those on the payroll, and they're having to one by one go through them, and they're complex because obviously you're dealing with individuals, and each individual's circumstance in terms of their pension and their employment is going to be different, isn't it? So I think the point you make, Roger, is right, and I think there's a bit of trying to walk through this, collectively, deal with the issues as and when they arise, and make sure that at the end of the day, with a fair win, that we're not left at least without significant funding at the
close scrutiny.
At the end of it. I mean, I think slightly cutting across Becky presenting the report, because I know she's got more that she wants to say, but I mean, I think the thing that struck me just reading the report that I think is helpful, given the conversation we've just had about some of the risks here, is that you've got an MOU that is signed up to by, the LGA, the employers, etc., but also by the FBU, and there's some mutual agreement about this, and people are trying to work together. And I think the undertaking from colleagues in the trades unions, specifically in the FBU, that they will not fund and seek particular legal action where the framework is adhered to, I think is really, really helpful, because I think, colleagues are going to have to work collaboratively on this to resolve it. Obviously, they reserve a right to take legal action if the framework isn't adhered to, and I think there are some potential for risks for us around timescales, etc., given what Becky said about West Yorkshire Pension Fund having to deal with 21 services. But, I don't think this is going to be by any means straightforward, and I just hope at the end of it we are not left significantly out of penny for the administrative side, the internal side of costs. As Becky says, the pension side of the cost will run through the will run through the national scheme.
Yeah. So I mean, in longer term, so what this is doing is delaying the implementation, if you see, of the 2015 scheme. So once everybody's in the 2015 scheme, ongoing costs of that scheme will be the same. So it's just those sort of 7 years that we're covering where people have transitioned.
But everybody's signed up to the framework now, so everybody's agreed to that framework, so you know where you're working to. So
Some of the implications, just for members, some of the implications of this is the uncertainty dealing with that, because it's the spin-off is about whether people want to go for jobs or not in the uniform service. So promotion has a big implication about where they are on their pensions and what scheme they're in. So across the country, we're seeing probably a slowing down of people wanting to do things, thinking, well, I just need to wait and see what's happening there because I make a different choice. So outside the actual pension itself, there's some operating difficulties this is causing.
Okay, and I think everybody's different to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And the remedying legislation still isn't in place, is it?
No, that's
20
the
to
issue.
23,
If
late
that
20.
went
So there's
through.
another huge unknown.
2 years.
Okay, Becky, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. So the next part is in 2.26 the review of the cost cap mechanism. So under the original, the 2015 scheme legislation, there was a clause in there so that if the cost of the pension increases or decreases by 2%, then employee either contributions or benefit accruals will change to reflect that. And in 2016, we had the first valuation of the scheme, and the costs did drop below that 2% threshold, which meant that the accrual rate, we were expecting the accrual rate that members accrue their pension would need to have been increased. So they've got a better accrual rate, they'll get a better pension because the costs are less than we anticipated. But at the same time, when that happened, the employer charges that the fire service pays is calculated in a slightly different way. So the cost to the fire service were going up by 9%, whereas the accrual rates were going up. So that wasn't the intention of the cost cap mechanism, was try to control the costs in a fair way, so that if costs were less, then benefits would increase, but the cost to the taxpayer overall didn't increase astronomically. So they're looking at reviewing that cost cap mechanism to try and make it a bit fairer. And they've done some consultation, and they've come back now and they've with 3 recommendations that they're going to just change. One of those is widening that 2% to 3%, so it won't hit the trigger to be amended unless it's 3% more than the cost or 3% lower than the original cost of the pension scheme. And then they've talked about the fact that some of the costs relate to those legacy schemes, the 1995 and the 2006 scheme. And is that fair that members of the new scheme are picking up those costs of those old schemes? And the consultation has come back and said that no, that's not very fair. So those costs will now fall to the Treasury, the Exchequer, and the 2015 scheme will just pick up those additional costs related to the new scheme only. And then they're reviewing the changes in the long-term economic assumptions. So they're just trying to make it fit better with the original intention. So I did mention earlier that the 2016 valuation, that's undertaken in the existing legislation, because obviously this is retrospective now. But we've had a new valuation from 2020, which we've submitted all the information for, but that has not yet been finalised, the valuation. So this new scheme will apply to that new valuation, if that makes sense. So it's just to update you really on that. So there's no. I think it's just bringing things in line. It's a sort of reasonable change to make. The final area that I wanted to update you on is Matthews and O'Brien, because now we're almost moving towards resolution on the McLeod case. It's time for something else to come over the horizon for me to look forward to, and this is that. So. Back in 2014, there was a judgment that on-call firefighters were originally not allowed to join in the pension scheme, and that was deemed to be discriminatory for part-time workers. So they were permitted to join from 1st of July 2000. They were allowed to join. So this was retrospectively, but in 2014. So we went back, and all employees from 2000 that on-call contracts were allowed to buy back their pension service and join the pension scheme. Since then, there's been a further case, the O'Brien case, and that's saying that actually, why have you only gone back to 2000? But these employees were employed much before then, and we should be going back to the original date of their first employment. So that's what is now happening, and there are legal discussions have commenced with the government and the LGA. They've not quite been finalised yet, but we're very aware that that's going to have a huge impact on us. And the biggest difficulty for us as fire authorities is that we need records that go back prior to July 2000, and with GDPR, with the data protection, a lot of those records have been destroyed. So we haven't got, and also don't forget that the fire authority wasn't. This goes beyond when the fire authority was set up as and we were formed part of the county council. So some of those records would have been held at the county council, and they're no longer available for us because they've all been destroyed. So we're having to start to think about, knowing that this is coming up, how we would try and identify those people that would be entitled to this pension. So hence what I was saying earlier, the extra post in HR to give us some support, and I can't say I've got any answers on that at the moment, but that's what we're trying to think about, how we
So
go.
was it retired on-call firefighter? They weren't in the pension scheme a few years ago. They can claim into the pension scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could originally buy, but if they were still serving, they could buy back their years of service that they would have had pensionable.
But you've got a lot of probably moved on and retired,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and they could claim.
Yes. There's also an element here about checking we're checking the impact as well of those that were in the on-call but then transferred to the whole time or their time of service. So there may be some people that could claim back more on-call pension that they've not had, and then that might affect the date at which they then retire. So we've got a prediction that there might be some in the organisation that would leave at a different time than we would predict them in the workforce plan. So we might find that people leave because they're making different decisions based on what pension they would have accrued or that they can see now. So there's an absolute knock-on as that as well.
That's a knock-on, but that's something you know about, but it's what you don't know about
That is
Yes.
the problem.
Yeah.
So we might be relying on people coming forward to us, for example.
I work for you.
Yeah.
Debbie?
Yeah, just on that. So the obvious question is, how many people does this affect? But the response I
And
think
the obvious
would be,
answer is I have no idea.
Yeah, so, okay.
We will
So
be,
just on that though, so people coming forward on the basis, so we're going to have to encourage people to come forward.
yeah, we will be looking at
How do we
doing.
ascertain, given records have been destroyed, that people actually did work for us?
Well, if
I mean,
people can provide us with evidence, that's
Yeah.
very good.
So anything from
Pay slips.
Yeah,
Station photos. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine it's going to be really
That's how far
broad
down
in
we've got to
terms
go.
of evidence.
Literally.
Yeah,
That's-
I know that seems like it.
slightly incredulous at that, but okay.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and Mark did mention
Okay.
to me just the other day that the axes that were presented when people leave quite often have the start date and the end date on.
Okay.
So there could be quite a good.
Multiple use, brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be a different
just
one.
buying them on eBay. Second-hand axe, please.
Oh, God. This in many ways sounds worse than McLeod.
It does, but I'm hoping I'll be gone before I get to this one. I'm going to buy an axe.
Well, I'm hoping you're not. So
So that was it on the pension report. The recommendations are to note the activity of the pension board and also to approve the adoption of the framework for managing the immediate detriment issues, which is attached as an appendix.
Yeah.
And I think we should just add, Malcolm, the third recommendation to agree that the Chief Fire Officer and Chair of the Authority write on behalf of the Authority to thank West Yorkshire, whatever the appropriate term is, West Yorkshire Pension Fund, and specifically Helen Scargill, to thank them for their support and assistance. Are people happy that we do that? Tom?
Yeah, if it's all right to ask Becky a few questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So, members will know that I've been on the pension board at the County Council now for 8 years, just come off this May. Obviously, I'm familiar with things like the McLeod. Obviously, affects all local government staff, not just fire authority, and it's obviously putting a lot of strain on the the County Council, which obviously manages many of our employees as well. A couple of questions which I suppose are missing from the report, which I'm used to seeing in things like the County Council report, is firstly, how much it costs per member for the administration of the pension. Obviously, you talk about some of the strains. How much does it cost per member to administer the pension, and how much do we pay, and how much is that in comparison to other authorities? And I use the County Council as a gauge. The County Council are struggling to administer some of these things with McLeod, yet are 25% lower per member than most other authorities anywhere in the country. So the obvious question is, why don't we make ourselves comparable and buy in more resource and help us cope? I know the County Council are considering that now. But then the second thing, I was concerned maybe not to see in the reports with some of maybe the wider environmental and kind of social questions about where actually does the pension money get invested, where's our position on it. You know, obviously not to probably pick on the County Council here a little bit, but you know, it's been exposed that they're investing in arms, tobacco, coal mine, iron ore companies, all stuff that arguably you wouldn't necessarily socially agree with. And unlike County Council Pension Fund, Fire Authority Pension Fund, it's a one-stop shop. You can't choose. Like, obviously, we can all choose to invest in private firms and can look at their ethics and choose whether we put our money in. If you're a fire authority, if you're a fireman or woman, and you want to invest in a pension fund, you have to choose this one. So we have to be a little bit more ethical. And one thing I was a little bit probably concerned to see is the fact that we don't seem to be mentioning it anywhere in the report, actually, where this large amount of money is being invested.
Okay.
So there's the two questions, really.
If I take that one first, so the local government pension scheme that's administered by the county council is a funded scheme. So all the funding contributions from both employers and employees are invested, as you say, and then that fund is used to pay out pensions. The firefighters' pension fund is an unfunded scheme, so it's not backed up by any investments at all. We run at a deficit, so the amount that we pay out to pensioners exceeds the amount that we collect in as a fire service. Usually it does vary each year depending on how many people retire and lump sums, but it's usually about 8 to 10 million pounds just for this one fire authority. So we then claim that money back off the government, so it's met by taxpayers funding. So there are no investments that back this scheme, which is why there's no report in here on that. The cost of administration, I can calculate that and put in future reports. We have been out to tender, and the West Yorkshire Pension Fund have only been providing our service for since December last year, so coming up to a year. And we did save a significant amount of money. I can't remember the exact amount, so I could confirm to you, but it
makes sense to pull,
yeah. But there are only two providers of the software for pension schemes, and one's significantly more expensive than the other, and that's what drives the cost of the administration for firefighters' pensions. And we moved from the more expensive one to the cheaper one, which was the reason that the costs have come down. So I can.
Your question, Tom, about cost is one of the prime drivers for why we changed who was administering the scheme. So there was quite a comprehensive report at the time when the tender process happened that actually went into some of the issues that you talked about. Really? And actually, I'm sure Becky can share that with you.
We do benchmark costs of administration, and that exercise didn't. The LGA run that for us, and that didn't happen last year due to COVID. But the year before, when we were in the when Leicestershire County Council ran our administration, we were virtually bang on the 50th percentile. We were right in the middle of costs, and now I'm expecting that we would have come down probably to the sort of quarter range because our costs have reduced. But a lot of other services have moved to West Yorkshire, so I suppose the average will have come down as well.
Toby?
I was just going to say it's probably worth sharing the previous reports on this with the newer members, because I just remember it being quite a long, drawn-out exercise with lots of toing and froing, and ultimately we managed to get the deal with West Yorkshire, but I think that was a bit borderline in terms of, right up until the last minute, but they've been really quite good in terms of the work they've been doing, but understanding the background to it, because it is strange. It's not like the council at all, which is a funny thing. We're sort of looking around and finding where we're going to get money from, and are the government, because the input from the money from the government every year is not guaranteed, is it? It's sort of like, or not the amount isn't guaranteed. They'll give us something, we just never know exactly what it is.
Yeah. Sorry, Becky. The couple of things that drove it as well. It wasn't just the kind of the money; it was the risk that local authorities didn't necessarily have the expertise in terms of firefighter pension schemes. LGPS was their kind of bag, so they were looking at McLeod and O'Brien and thinking, there's not a lot of knowledge here. And hence, I think, because it's gone into West Yorkshire, we've got the idea that it's a bigger organisation, more resilient. I think that was your point about the county council as well, councillor. So we're in a better place in terms of skills and expertise. 21 fire services with one provider that knows what they're doing, and the cost-wise was what drove it as well, which was quite a significant difference. But we can get the reports, as you said, councillor. Yeah.
And it is understanding the different schemes that we've got going on
Yeah.
in it.
Yes. Yeah.
It is how it is. You know.
For comparatively low member numbers compared to, say, LGPS, it's really, really complicated.
Yeah.
And you rely on the government to underwrite it all as well.
The government underwrite the cost of the pensions. What the grant that Toby's talking about that we get is they increased the employer rate significantly about 4 years ago, and we got some additional grant to cover the cost of that. So the employer contributions, and I think our costs went up by £2.5 million in one go, which is a significant sum for the authority. And we got a grant of 2.3 million, so we were left with a shortfall of 200,000. But since then, that grant has been cash flat, so it's not been increased with wage inflation. So obviously our contributions are a percentage of the wages, the salaries that we pay to firefighters. So our costs have gone up, and that grant has remained the same. So that's where we're not, and it's not guaranteed each year. It could be withdrawn. So that's an area of concern for the budget, but it doesn't affect what we pay to the pensioners.
And it's an area of concern every year.
Yeah.
I know
That's exactly what wrote. Yeah.
But basically, if you've got more drawn on that pension pot, and only X amount going in, there's going to be a bigger gap, isn't it?
Yeah. Nationally, I think it's about 800 million is going out, 300 million's going in. So there's a 500 million firefighter pension deficit, and that grows around about 5% per year. So you can kind of see just in the firefighters' pension scheme.
And that's where that's all the additional that's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is probably not dissimilar to any other
No.
taxpayer
It's
underwritten scheme.
a difficult one though, because you kind of think to yourself, I mean, these people deserve the pension they're going to get. I mean, more than anything, and you wouldn't ever talk about it in the terms of anything other, but it's a tough budget for running the fire authority ongoing, isn't it? Well, thanks for building my knowledge. I think Toby's suggestion of maybe some history of it all would be helpful to some of the new members particularly.
I think the lesson is don't mess with people's pensions and assume you can get away with it.
That is very true.
There's always a McLeod.
Oh, because actually it's people's livelihood, isn't it? And you're trying to plan your life and you mess around with somebody's pension, they probably will have something to say about it. And in this case, they have done, and they've been proved correct. To be fair to them.
Yeah, very true.
Okay, so the two recommendations plus the recommendation I read out, I'm going to move. Are people happy to, Malcolm, I'll pick up the specific wording of it, but I think the flavour is to Kath Scott. Yeah, brilliant, excellent. Thank you, Catherine.
I'm just wondering on the second recommendation, we should have a formal vote.
We should vote, yeah, we should absolutely vote, yeah. Well, we'll vote on all three, the recommendations, we'll take them together. So all those in favour of the recommendations? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Item 5 is constitutional update. Malcolm's going to speak to this report, but I just want to say by way of introduction to this, well rehearsed, I think, that clearly there are some, I think the most appropriate place way to say this, some legislative impacts that we need to just update our kind of standing orders, rules, the documentation that sits around our governance. The way I see this is that this does not become some laborious kind of heavy, long-winded exercise. This is simply about trying to make sure that our appropriate documentation reflects the current legislative frameworks. Obviously, we've got the Police and Crime Commissioner, etc. We've got some changes in legislation. We've got some things that just need updating. What I don't want this to become is a kind of mammoth task about changing our governance approach, etc. So you'll see from the recommendations that the suggestion is that as chair of the authority, or in my absence, the vice chair, I sit down with the clerk, who obviously advises independently on these matters. The chief fire officer obviously discharged with the day-to-day running of the service, supported by the chief fire officer's executive support officer, John Mills, is here today. But that any changes to that documentation come back through this committee first, before then obviously being approved by fire authority. So if you like, we're the body that's going to have to ultimately kind of rubber stamp this stuff before it then goes through to full fire authority. And what I've said to Malcolm is, my experience of these things is designing documentation by committee is a nightmare, and I don't particularly want to be involved in the word-to-word drafting. I think we need to rely on Malcolm in the initial instance to kick off the ball on that. But that if there are things that have got a specific member impact in relation to our meetings, then clearly we'll consult with members, and my view would be this is the appropriate place to do that in the initial instance before we obviously go to full authority. If there is anything, I think, throughout the review that comes up where we think actually we need a view of all members, then we'll just go out to consult all members. We'll write to all members and say, look, you know, there's this particular thing we're grappling with at a minute as a committee. You know, is there any view on it? So that's kind of the driving force behind the report. I mean, this is not going to be like the constitutional review at the county council or a review of a constitution at a borough council where we're going to go through systematically and totally change our processes. This is about simply trying to bring us up to date with where current legislation is and some of the changes, etc. Malcolm, do you want to say anything else over and above that?
I think you've explained it very well, Chair, actually, because from my own perspective, having gone through the constitutional review at the city, which was a huge amount of work, what I would say here is this is effectively, as you say, a bringing up to date of our existing arrangements. So if, for example, I was to say that the original constitution at the city was probably 1.5 inches thick, and then we managed to trim it down to probably half its size, the standing orders we have here are effectively 22 pages, but there are other framework documents that sit with it, so financial regulations, member officer code of conduct, financial regulations. We need to bring in the National Core Code of Ethics for the fire standard. We also need to look at the member officer protocol. So there are things we need to look at, but a lot of these will be national documents that already exist within our framework, as Michael says. It's just about bringing it up to date. The other thing I would just like to signal, Chair, which is outside of this report, is I am talking to the Independent Remuneration Panel at the moment. There has been a slight delay due to illness and injury, but I had a meeting with them this week, and I've got a meeting with them not next week, the week afterwards. So there are issues that I am reviewing with that body, which will be going forward in due course.
Brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm.
So other than that, it's basically the 3 recommendations in the report.
Brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm. Are people content with that as an approach? And I think there's clearly going to be an ongoing conversation about this through group leaders as well. Which has been a really, really helpful forum. So there's all manner of ways we can deal with this, but clearly this is the appropriate committee that will give first sign off before things go back through to full authority. And the update about the IRP stuff's really helpful, Malcolm, which obviously sits outside of this report, but it's really helpful. People happy with the recommendations?
Just one question. Sorry, not putting any pressure on timescales. It says to a future meeting. Is the intention to bring it to the next quarter's meeting, or do we want to put a timescale on this, or would you rather not? Because I'm not particularly
If
bothered.
possible, I'll bring it to the next meeting.
Okay.
And it may well be that we bring an update to the next meeting.
Yeah, not necessarily.
But given the number of documents that need to be reviewed, I want to make sure we get it right.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. I kind of said to Malcolm that I don't think we should set a timescale on this, because actually you're setting false timescales, and if you don't then meet them, people then think, well, why haven't they been met? And actually, we need to get this right. We need to make sure that we're in line with where, we need to make sure we're in line with where the legislation is. And I'm also very, very conscious, you know, he does a really good job for us, but actually Malcolm's quite a busy person in his day job as well. And, you know, we need to be reasonable about this sort of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
The one assurance I would give you is that obviously I'll keep your standing orders under constant review anyway.
Yeah.
So if I thought there was something missing that prevented you from complying with your legislative requirements, I would immediately bring that to your attention.
Okay.
So we have dealt, for example, with the Police and Crime Commission in a separate way through separate reports.
Yeah. Thank you, Malcolm. Thanks, Toby. That's really helpful. People happy with the recommendations? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 6 is exclusion of the public. So it's for us to consider excluding the public from the meeting during the consideration of the remaining items in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972 under Schedule 12A, Part 1, Paragraph 3, on the basis that, having regard to all the circumstances, the public interest in maintaining an exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So I'm going to move that we agree that. People happy to agree that we go into exclusion of the public exempt session? Thank you very much. So if you could